Thank you for joining me today. I'm Madeline Blair, and this is Unlocked, a show all about building the resilient leader in you. Today, we're going to be talking with David Hutchens, one of the best storytelling leaders I've met, and I've met quite a few. After my conversation with David, we'll be sharing grounds for thought all about a particular kind of story. So stay tuned to see what's brewing. Welcome back. I'm Madeline Blair, and this is Unlocked. And today we're talking about teaching old stories new tricks. You know, human beings have been telling stories to one another for thousands of years. They were used to remember history. Before books existed, storytellers, often called shamans, would tell the story of a people that would take hours in the telling. It was a way for people to remember who they were and even why they were. They were used to convey important values. Embedded in those historic stories were things that people felt were important. Perhaps it was bravery. Perhaps it was skill. Perhaps it was family. A shorter version of these stories we sometimes call fairy tales. And if you read the original form of the fairy tales, there are major lessons for children to learn, such as being careful, being honest. They were also used to entertain. I can imagine the storyteller, sometimes called the jester, telling an entertaining tale to give pleasure to the listeners. I suspect there were often other things embedded in those stories, but I imagine the listener was mostly following the story for the joy. We still use stories for conveying history. That's what movies like The Imitation Game are about. Tell an entertaining story that also embeds historical truth in it. Today, we also use stories to convey important values. We tell stories about important characters from history that praise certain attributes of them. This is true even when the story is not. George Washington never chopped down a cherry tree, but we learn the value of being honest from it. It was actually written in 1806 by Mason Locke Weems, a traveling minister and bookseller. When Washington died in 1799, Weems felt that people wanted to learn about the first president, and he created Washington and the Cherry Tree. Today, we most certainly use stories to entertain us. I mean, Netflix wouldn't have a successful business model if it weren't for the tens of thousands of movies and videos. And of course, Netflix is just one. Today, we have enriched our use of stories by identifying specific uses for such stories as selling ideas or introducing ourselves to others through story. And there is a person who has identified many more specific uses of story. His book, Circle of Nine Muses, I got to get this up for you so you can see it for those of you who are watching. Circle of Nine Muses, it lays it all out. This person is David Hutchens, my guest for today, who will talk about how he continues to add new tricks, in only the best use of the word, to how we use story. David is also one of my favorite people. We met over telling each other a personal story during a conference small group exercise. I mean, it's got to be at least 15 years ago. And mostly since then, we've just spoken by phone, but we are fast friends, a testament to the power of story to build relationships. David Hutchens is best described as a storytelling leader, helping leaders worldwide harness the power of storytelling, or as he describes it, the voice of engagement. Now, don't be misled, by the way, by the word leader. Remember that we are all leaders inside, even if it's only to lead our own career or own life. Okay, going back to David. He has worked with organizations such as Accenture, IBM, Google, PayPal, Cisco, FedEx, L'Oreal of Paris, NASA, and others across the continents, connecting to the heart of their leadership. Hutchens has also developed learning products, and I think he's going to talk about some of those today, and modules for clients such as IBM, and has authored numerous books. Titles including, oh, I love this one, Outlearning the Wolves, another one called Listening to the Volcano. I don't have that book, but my very favorite, and you've already seen, Circle of the Nine Muses. Now, my notes say, bring David onto the stream. So here he is. Hello, David. Welcome to Unlocked.
Wow, Madeline, what an incredible introduction. I was dying to respond to everything you said. You said so many great things. 1 hour is not going to be enough for us, Dr. Blair.
It's easy. We just schedule more time. I mean, another time. Today we have our usual 56 minutes. But I'm so happy to have you with me. And the fact that we're going to be going over story is just, well, that's icing on the cake.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned that story circle we were in 15 years ago. I don't know if you and I have talked about that. I actually remember that very well.
Yeah.
And I don't remember the content of the stories that we shared. What I remember is what it felt like to sit there and that connection that we had. And that was 15 years ago. The emotional memory sticks in your body for a really, really long time, doesn't it?
Isn't that interesting? You're right. Because I don't know what story you told either, but the emotion was there. Yeah.
And we were instant friends and have been ever since. And that's the idea of the story skill for leaders is, what are your big ideas? Connect ideas to feelings. Connect ideas to feelings.
You know, I think people always think that when we make big decisions, we make them analytically and rationally, but you can't make a decision without emotion. So get over it. All right, let's get into this. Our title is called Teaching Old Stories, New Tricks. Now, stories have been told for thousands of years. It's a very old form. So how can we use this very old form to communicate new things that actually do things for us today?
Yeah, this old idea is finding new applications in knowledge era organizations. And so we bring this in, I would say start with outcomes. You know, this is strategic. We're not telling stories to entertain, usually, as leaders. We're not telling stories because it's fun. I mean, it is fun, but that's not why we're doing it. We're telling stories because there's something that we're trying to make happen. And so if it is story for influence, we start with outcomes. It can be stories for connecting people to the identity, culture, and belonging work. It can be for bringing something new into the system. It can be for aligning people to a strategy. It can be for selling. If you're trying to sell, you should be telling stories if you're not. So we start with these outcomes. Why are we telling stories? These days, Madeline, a lot of groups I talk to increasingly are saying, we just want to connect. We're in this remote world. We're not sitting in the same office anymore. I don't even know how tall you are. I only know what you look like in this little square on a screen. And a lot of my clients are saying, we just want to connect. Well, stories are really great for that.
Yeah. Well, My audience is made up principally, about 70% are women between the ages of 30 and 60, most of them pursuing a career. So I'm curious, can we direct our comments today to really focus on that audience? And what are some things that they might find really useful to them to bring story into their career?
Okay. Yeah, definitely. One thing I hear from leaders a lot is, how do I tell stories about myself? Because there's this idea that as a leader, and it's true, I should be telling more we stories than me stories. I should be directing you to the mission, to the team. And a lot of leaders are saying, it's not about me. I don't want to talk about me. It's not about me.
Yeah.
And I tell my leaders, it is about you. You've stepped into this role. We're looking at you. You are the embodiment of the values and the work and the mission. So we're looking at you. So there is a place to tell stories about you, especially if you're interviewing. Your interviewer is going to expect you to tell stories about yourself. So the question is, how do I do that without sounding like a jerk? Because we're told not to talk about ourselves. So I thought, in response to your question, I could share some ideas of different kinds of stories that your audience definitely has that I bet they're not telling.
All right. Proceed, David.
Okay, so there's thousands of stories that your audience members could be telling. Okay, here's one. Since you showed Outlearning the Wolves, the book,
Yeah.
one a lot of people ask me, how did you get into this story work, David? And it was that book, Outlearning the Wolves, is what brought me into the work. So where that came from is, this is back in the early 2000s, late 1990s. I was living in Atlanta, and I was doing some work. I was a freelance communications guy, but I was working with the Coca-Cola company in Atlanta. And they came to me with a challenge. And the challenge was that they had embarked on this transformation journey to become what was known as a learning organization. And for those of us who remember Peter Senge and the fifth discipline, and this was a really big conversation in the early 2000s. And my client at Coke said, early in our work, we've run into a problem. And the problem is, nobody here understands what we're talking about when we say we want to be a learning organization. It's kind of dense theory, systems theory and mental models, and geeks like us like that stuff, but not everybody wants to read that book. They said, can you help us with a communication solution to help people understand what we're talking about? And so I was still in my 20s when I did this. I didn't know how to write about organizational learning theory. So I went home and I wrote a crazy story about a flock of sheep that outwits a pack of hungry wolves. And in the process, they show the capabilities of organizational learning. And Madeline, really, I thought that this would get me fired, to be honest, because it was so, it's got snarky jokes in it. And
it does.
Cartoon animals, yeah. And it ended up going viral. And today it's in 12 languages, and it's still selling. I'm still getting messages from people 25 years later. And that was the moment that made me say, okay, what just happened here? Why did this crazy solution that I thought was going to get me fired, why did it generate this response? And so that was really the moment where I thought, I'm going to focus on this phenomenon, this story. And back in the early 2000s, there weren't many people talking about this yet. So that was really the moment of discovery where I said, I think there's something here. And I've been exploring this idea ever since then.
Well, I think one of the things that made it so, and still continues to make it so effective, is that you're discussing what could be a delicate situation. What do you mean we're not learning here? We're always learning. Well, you're not. But it puts it in a frame of a story, and the story becomes neutral, and you can explore the story, and then the lessons just sort of creep in as you discuss the story. So, yeah. There's another thought that's coming. Oh, I'm sorry. You were going to say something more.
Uh, no, you go ahead. I'll come back.
Okay. Well, I was thinking actually I'm going to change the subject because right now a lot of people are, I'll say they're changing jobs, whether it's self initiated or not. But there's a lot of movement. And one of the questions, now I'm thinking now as a manager, how do I assess whether you are a candidate that I want to bring into my company? And so I want to know why. What's the story? Why is it that they want to be here? What's your why are you here story?
Okay, good. So this is so good. Let me back up. Let me come up 10,000 feet, and then I'm going to come back down again.
Okay.
So, because I just told you a story, right? The Outlearning the World story,
Yes, yes,
and that is a story type. That is a why I'm here story, right?
yes.
It's an origin story.
And it's why David Hutchens is here.
It's why I'm here. It's
Yeah.
not right. And you have your own version, your own origin stories, your own why I'm here stories. This thing that you care about in the world. Tell me what brought you into this. There was something that happened. Bring me into a moment. And so the why I'm here origin story is one of the stories that you have and I have and your audience has. And you don't only have one. We have lots of these origin stories. There's origin stories all the time. This new project that I've joined. Let me tell you why I care about this. This promotion that I got. Let me tell you why I pursued this job. There was something that brought me to this. So we have opportunities to tell these why I'm here. It was true at the beginning origin stories all the time. And so that's one of mine. I actually have many origin stories about the story work, but that's one of the really good ones that I tell people.
It's a good one.
So, jumping into the question that you just asked, people are coming into organizations and they've made a change. And this is another story type. So we just talked about the why I'm here story. Here's another one. So I actually began my career, Madeline, in advertising. Before I came into organizational learning, I worked as a copywriter in big advertising agencies in Dallas, Texas, and Atlanta, Georgia. And I loved the creative process of being a copywriter and writing TV commercials and radio commercials. What I didn't love was I was writing about things I didn't care about. I was writing about hamburgers. I was spending 60 hours a week writing about credit cards and floor wax. And it was burning me out. And I knew I wanted to write about leadership and innovation and organizations. And so I quit my job in the advertising business so that I could write about leadership and teams. And I remember the day I quit. Actually, I'm coming up on the 30-year anniversary because I actually have the resignation letter with a date on it. So it's in just a few weeks, I'll hit 30 years of self-employment. So I left the ad biz. And since then, I've been working with organizations all around the world. And I still, at heart, consider myself an ad guy at some level. But instead of selling Coca-Cola, now I'm helping ideas move through organizational systems. So I'll pause there. What I just shared with you, Madeline, is a story type that I call the leap. And this is a story that most of us have. It recognizes that we're making a shift at some point in our career. I used to be in this world over here, but now I'm in this world today. And the way to tell this story, it's not, I hated my job, so I quit. It's not that. It's, I made a change, and now I'm in this world, but I bring a gift with me from this previous world that makes me a little bit different. It makes me unique in this world. I used to sell Coca-Cola. Now I help ideas move through organizations using some of those same skills. So the trick to the leap story is, what is the thing that you bring from this different world that might sound a little out of place today, but it gives you a different perspective, a different approach to the work that you're doing. That's the leap.
Oh, I've heard about the leap story, but it never occurred to me that it was what distinguishes you different from other people. I mean, I'm thinking about one of my leap stories where I left the World Bank. I had I had built a wonderful division. They they excelled in everything they did. They loved me. I loved them. We did a lot of good stuff, and then management shifted, and I could no longer. They could no longer achieve that because of the constrictions that had been placed given to the new management structure. And I said, I can't protect them. I can't protect me. We can't do what we used to do. I'm going to leave, and I did. But what I brought with me now, because of this, I'm thinking to myself, I brought with me 10 years of senior management experience, which distinguished me from a lot of consultants. So thank you for that insight.
See, when you engage with your clients, they need to hear that story.
Yeah.
We need to know that about you, that you bring this, it's what is it, the Aristotle ethos, pathos, and logos. That this is the ethos. Who is this person? What is their credibility?
Mm.
Well, your credibility is in your stories. It's
Yeah.
in the world you used to live in.
Fabulous.
Mhm.
Fabulous. Tell me the next one. Because what's on my list is a process story. Your wolf story is about learning. Are there other kinds of process stories that we can use?
Um, yeah. Here, so I work with a lot of science and data leaders, and here's a story that I used to be embarrassed to ask for this one, and now I'm not. I call it the geek story. A group that I've been working with is NASA, their climate science teams, really smart scientists. Some of them have
Yeah.
double PhDs, and we're trying to help them tell stories, and they're so left-brained that this is a difficult skill. And so I was talking to one of their young scientists, and he was studying, methane in the atmosphere, and he was showing me his scatter plot graphs, and my eyes were glazing over, and I'm going, I feel like a dummy. I don't understand anything you're talking about. And so finally I interrupted him, and I asked the question that I used to be embarrassed to ask. And the question is, okay, this is interesting, but as you were working on this, what's the part that was cool? And he goes, what do you mean cool? I'm doing my job. It's a scientific process. It's a disciplined methodology. I'm like, yeah. I get that. But was there a part where you got excited while you were doing this work?
Yeah.
And I saw him go, He said, well, actually, you know what? When we were gathering this data, methane is really hard to measure in the atmosphere. So what I did was I got permission to charter a private flight, a private plane. It's a little propeller plane. And so I'm up over these oil fields in Texas, and we're at a high altitude. So I'm wearing an oxygen mask, and I have the spectrometer in my lap, and I'm pointing it down to measure the methane. And then what was really cool is my team was in a Jeep. They had a spectrometer pointing up, and they're underneath me, and I'm trying to stay over them. And he said, because of our coordination, we got the most accurate readings of methane of any team at NASA ever.
Wow.
And then he paused, and he goes, and the rest of his team was there, and they're all going like this. And he goes, should I put that story in my presentation? And everybody's like, and it's amazing how often this happens. We have these stories. We don't know that, we almost don't even know that we have them. People say, really? You want to hear me talk about this? And so I call this the geek story. There's something that's exciting to me. I don't know if anybody else cares about this, but I get excited. Good. Tell us that story. We started our conversation talking about emotion. Emotion is one of the defining characteristics of story. Show us a time when you felt something, when you were geeking out because you get to do this work that you love, when you believed, when you learned something, right? Tell us these stories of you believing in the work. I know you have these stories. The world wants to hear them.
I keep going back in my mind as you're writing advertising script. Was there anything during that time that gave you that sense of satisfaction, I'll call it, as you did it? I mean, because you stayed with it for a while.
Yeah. The thing I loved was the strategic piece of it. You know, when you're an ad guy, the account executive comes in and they have it's called a creative brief. Here's our client. It's Coca-Cola. Here's what they're trying to do. Here's the outcome of this message. They want to create a moment of optimism and connect optimism to Coca-Cola, and then and then there's some other parameters. It's a 30-second television spot, and so we get these strategic boundaries, and then we have to work backwards.
Mm,
What's an image, a story, a message that will get us to that outcome? It's actually really hard to do.
yeah.
When you see the Coca-Cola commercial, you go, oh, of course, obvious, that works. Oh, I love that commercial. But the sweat behind it of starting with this outcome and then working backwards, we would have hundreds of sticky notes all over the wall of the office. I actually love that process. And now that I'm working on strategic storytelling with leaders, I bring a similar kind of sensitivity to it. What are you trying to do with this story? Let's start with that
Mhm.
and let's work backwards. What's the story that's going to get you to that outcome?
I know that that your work is with leaders. I always think of every person leading their own career. I mean, you're making choices all the time. So there
Right.
is the leadership work within you. How does that relate to the people that you work with? What's your thoughts on that?
I share your thoughts about that. We're all leaders. A leader is anyone who points to the future and says, I think we should go this way.
Thank you.
And then you turn around and say to people, follow me, come with me. When it comes to story work, I've worked with CEOs of Fortune 500. I have also worked with inmates at the Tennessee Prison for Women who were, expecting to be released from prison on parole, and we would build business plans. What are the stories you're going to tell to create your identity in the marketplace? I've worked with adults on the autism spectrum at Vanderbilt University. I've worked with homeless populations. This is absolutely a universal skill. Not only is this for innovation and design leaders at Google, this is for you. This is for anyone who has a voice in the world, which is all of us. So I am absolutely inclusive when it comes to this skill.
Great. I didn't know that you worked with the homeless.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a story you can share from that experience?
Yeah. This one was a while ago. I'm trying to remember. So the challenge with homeless population, it's about voice. It's about the outcome in that work was
Yeah.
see me, because they're not seen. I remember one guy saying that standing on the corner with a sign, so that people will roll down their windows in traffic and hand me some money. He said, that's not the hardest part. Standing there all day is not the hardest part. The hardest part is people don't make eye contact with me.
Yeah.
And I know they see me and they just look straight ahead. And ever since he said that, even if I don't have a dollar to give in my pocket, I'll look at the person and I'll nod just to say, I
I
see.
see you.
Right. So that's what we focused on is you have a voice, you're not invisible, and story is the language that allows people to connect with you in this more human way.
Hmm. I'm really, really, really struck by that. I mean, I've I've known that was important to people who are on the street because suddenly you have no locus to call your own except
Right.
yourself. And if people don't acknowledge you exist, then it's really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I too have tried to always remember to make eye contact. Not sure I do, but I do try. But to hear it again is it's very touching and very moving.
I actually heard Otto Scharmer of MIT, who does a lot of work in presence. He talks about the violence of inattention. And I thought that was a good phrase, the violence of inattention. And that when I give my energy to you and when I give my attention to you, that that's a very human act. It's a form of love to choose to extend my attention to you, Madeline, and say, you're in my space. I see you. I hear you. Tell me your story.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm, good. Thank you. All right. It, in a way, it reminds me of the type of story which is sort of like revealing my heart to you. And yet, whenever I think of that kind of story, I always say, why is it that I should tell this kind of story?
Mm-hmm.
Because it feels so vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you've worked in this area.
Okay. So since you say that, I'm pulling up a document here because yes, I have a story about this.
Good.
The vulnerable story, the story that reveals who I am. I think all stories reveal more of ourselves. Just this
Yes.
language, it's like it opens us up so people see more of who we are. But can I share my screen?
No, unfortunately, you can't. You'll just have to hold it up.
Okay.
That doesn't work on. Well, if you had done it in advance, I could have done it, but we didn't.
Well, okay.
You know what I'm going to do though? I'm going to make you the only person on the screen so that what you hold up.
Okay. Good. So right now we don't hear you, Madeline, but here's the story that I'm going to share. Um, let's see. So this is a story that I originally shared on Instagram, and all my friends said, "Wow, Dave, that was really awesome." And as an experiment, I thought, what would happen if I shared this story on LinkedIn? Because it's not really a business story. So you see the photo here. I'm just going to read to you the text that goes along with this story. And so here's how this goes. The text above it says, "Mom, Dad," I said, "I want to paint the Beatles on the wall of my bedroom. This was in 1982, and I was 14 years old. We were eating dinner, and they didn't even pause. Okay, they said, don't get paint on the carpet. They always said yes and celebrated my weird ideas. They believed. I loved them for that. It gave me my career, and it's a gift that I was intentional about bringing forward to my own kids. I went with Yellow Submarine because, well, it was easy. Flat colors and 2 dimensions. Revolver would have been way too hard. When Hurricane Katrina ripped our house apart in 2005, yes, this was in New Orleans, the Beatles stayed dry. It was a miracle and proof that God loves the Beatles. Mom and Dad rebuilt the entire house around that wall. 40 years later, John, Paul, George, and Ringo are still there. Earlier this year, we moved Mom out of the house. Since Dad died last summer, she just hasn't been able to take care of herself. Last week, we moved all of the furniture out. Mom asked me if I wanted any of the furniture, but I said, no, I don't need anything. I have the stories, and that's enough. It was so weird walking through the empty house. I could hear echoes of kids laughing. I could hear shouts of war and "I shot you" in the backyard. But mostly, I heard the Beatles. "I Am the Walrus," "Good Day Sunshine," Ringo's solo in the Abbey Road side tube medley. I don't know what the new owners will do with the Beatles mural. They'll probably paint over it. Why wouldn't they? They don't have the story. I stopped by my room last to say goodbye to the boys. I raised my hand and returned the love sign to John Lennon. Goodbye. Thank you, I said. Love is all you need. What are the stories that made you who you are? So that's the story that I shared on LinkedIn. And this is the result. Again, it wasn't a business story. I wasn't selling anything. I wasn't making a business point. This story went viral. hundreds of comments, thousands of impressions. It put me in conversation with people that at Starbucks and elsewhere that I wanted to be in dialogue with. And so here's the invitation. We're being called to bring more of ourselves to our leadership. And that can feel scary and vulnerable, but that's part of the trade-off. When we bring more of who we are, we get the connection, we get the engagement. And so that's what I invite my leaders to do is bring more of your humanity to your voice. Lean into that. Recognize that that scary feeling is part of this process. And the more you lean into that, the more connection you get. So I don't know how to stop sharing my screen.
I do.
Good thing. So that's a story type I call Journey to the Heart. It's how much of yourself are you willing to reveal? And when you do that, the connection and the rewards are great.
You know, I have to admit it. Every time you tell one of those kinds of stories, and you actually tell one of them in the beginning of The Circle of Nine Muses, that book
Right.
began for me in tears. And I'm listening to you today and I'm going, I can feel the tears. I'm going, no, stop. You have to keep talking.
Yeah, I'm kind of feeling it too right now. Yeah.
You know, and it's funny because in this house where I live now, I have murals on the wall. And I keep thinking, well, when I leave, who's going to take care of these murals? Oh, well.
I know.
They've served their purpose. They've made life delightful for me. David, this is incredible. Thank you. Now I know why I should tell revealing my heart stories. I recently did that on a show called The Unlock Moment with Dr. Gary Crotaz. He's out of England, and his show is about those moments in life that unlock something in you. And in fact, he's been on my show, I've been on his show, because we just got connected by that word unlock. And I told one of them, and he said he couldn't believe how many hits it gets when he runs just the 1 minute segment of it. So you're right. They connect.
Are you going to leave us hanging on this? I would love to hear your story.
Oh, I don't know if I can do it. It's one of those you have to get ready to tell.
That's fair. Mm-hmm.
If you buy my book, it's in the book. It's
Okay.
actually in the introduction of my book. That's how you get it. It's a story about how I really came face to face with my own resilience, and that's what carried me through. Yeah,
I remember. It's a very tender story, and I love the fact that you just drew a boundary there and said this is not the place for that story, because that is one of the things that we talk about in this work is you have agency.
Yes.
Your stories are yours. You get to decide when and if you bring them forward. A group I work with here in Nashville is Thistle Farms. They help women come out of sex trafficking and drug addiction. One of the most successful programs in the country for very low recidivism. Women come off the street and we teach them leadership skills. Today they're running a $13 million organization selling bath and body products. So it's beautiful, but we were doing some values work to create what are the values of this organization. And I suggested that tell our story is one of the values. And they shut that down and they said, we don't want to spend the rest of our lives telling about the worst things that ever happened to us. Like they also run a cafe where, they cook and serve the food, and little Baptist women's groups will come in and say, hey, would you come to our church and talk about what it's like to be a prostitute? And they say, no, we don't want to do that. And so there's choices. We own our stories. The thing I said to them is, those aren't your only stories. I mean, we're doing story work. And I said, you have other stories.
Yeah.
You have stories of leadership. You have stories of learning. And those are the stories that we're telling now. But there is agency here. Yeah.
I love this aspect because oftentimes we ask people or you say to people, that's a story, but you can change the ending of that story. You can change the story. But you gave a real example of why it's important to set them aside, even though you may end up finding new stories or writing a different ending, because you don't want to live back in that. You don't want to reiterate that. You want to move forward. Oh,
Sometimes we choose our stories, and sometimes the stories choose us. And sometimes we come to a point in our life where we say, I don't need that story anymore. There was a period where I needed to tell that story.
yeah.
I'm
Yes.
different now. I have new stories, and you can feel yourself wanting to let go of some old stories.
Yeah. Hmm. Well, I have one more question that I want to ask you, and then we'll kind of circle back to this aspect of agency. I always ask teenagers to give me questions when I have a topic, and this is one from them. And I really liked this one. They said,
Okay.
well, how can a boring story be spun into something really spectacular? I mean, do you have any suggestions?
That's a huge question. That is the most important question. How do I make my story good? I spend a lot of time talking to leaders about this, and my work is organizational learning and skill building. So I like resources. I like little tools that you can hold in your hand to help leaders with this. To answer that question, one of the great resources is this. It's called the Leadership Story Deck. It's on Amazon. It's also on my website. It's a deck of cards with dozens of ideas of types of stories you could be telling. I already shared some of them with you. The Leap is in here. The Why I'm Here story is in here. Journey to the Heart is in here, as well as a bunch of other strategically focused stories. So that's one answer. Another resource we use is this. This is called the Story Canvas, and it's a framework for telling a really good story. And after we identify a story we want to tell in the story deck, then we use sticky notes. We build it on the story canvas. You can download this for free from my website. We'll provide the link for that.
I'll be sure to put that in the comments area in the YouTube announcement of this.
So how do we make a story good?
Mm-hmm.
If you liked the stories I told, Outlearning the Wolves, Quitting the Ad Agency, the Beatles mural, if you liked those, then the reasons why you liked them were, I would say, number one, emotion content, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm always looking for is the emotion in there. The Outlearning the Wolves story. I was afraid this solution would get me fired. Afraid of getting fired, I think, is the emotional hook of that story. We need that emotion, right? The Beatles mural. I said goodbye to my dad. I was walking through the empty house. This huge change in my life. What's the emotion? The emotion can be pride. It can be fear. It can tell us what it felt like. This is where we started our conversation. We remember what it felt like, you and I, 15
Yes.
years ago, the first time we met.
Yeah.
Maya Angelou, right? We forget what people say. We will never forget what it felt like. Yeah. So find the emotion content. I would say another thing is put people in there. Maybe this sounds obvious, but you would be surprised how many leaders step up and tell stories that don't have people in them. Stories are about people and the things that happen to people. We don't form empathy connections with a mission statement or with a brand. We form connections with human beings. Put people in the story. Let us see you. Let us see the team. Let us see the customer. Tell us their names. Tell us what happened. So those are two really easy pro tips for improving your story. A protagonist, a human protagonist, and some kind of emotion.
Easy. Everybody can remember 2 points, right?
Nothing easier, right? Your audience is ready to go. This is a weird skill where we could spend 20 years studying story theory and what makes a good story and spend the rest of our careers getting better and better at it. I mean, it's a deep art form. And they're ready to go tomorrow.
Yep.
They can tell stories right now. They can tell a Why I'm Here story, a Leap story, a Journey to the Heart story, a Eureka process story of a time I figured something out.
Yep.
You've got these stories. You can tell them this afternoon. Yep. When you do, watch the result. Watch how people respond, and then try telling it again. Before you know it, you will be a leader of inspiration.
David, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for the gems that have just dribbled all over the place.
You and I always have fun, don't we?
We do indeed. Well, before I take you off screen, just tell people how they can get in touch with you.
My website is storytellingleader.com. Storytellingleader.com. I'm very active on LinkedIn. If you're a LinkedIn person, please send me a connection. It's my favorite way to stay in conversation. I'm posting new ideas all the time, lots of tips and techniques for the story skill in an organizational setting. So follow me there. You're welcome to send me an email. We'll put that in the show notes. It's david@davidhutchens.com. And if you have questions, I'm happy to support you.
Wonderful. Again, David, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Blair. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Every now and then, there is something that changes how I think about the world. Grounds for Thought is a place where I talk about these moments so that you can explore the meaning for yourself. My ancestors came from Europe, so I know the tales like Little Red Riding Hood, or the biblical stories like King David and the two mothers who both claimed to be the mother of an infant. I had heard or read just about all of them multiple times over, and I remember one day complaining that I've heard these stories so many times. I'm getting tired of them, and they're old. I want some new stories. Well, you guessed it. It was almost immediately that I was invited to a retreat in New Mexico. And there I heard stories from Native Americans. I was absolutely delighted to hear new stories and happily surprised that they were about the same virtues and values I grew up on. More recently, I came across a book called The Raven and the Totem by John Smelser. He is a native Alaskan. And this book tells the stories of Native Alaskans. There is an opening story, or I could say a drawing, of the map of Alaska with the names of the native languages marked in the areas where each of them was spoken. And there must have been almost 20 different languages, everything from Aleut to Yupik. Within the book, there are lots of tales about Raven. Now, Raven is an important character in the formation stories of Native Americans. Now, David and I didn't talk about formation stories in this sense, but you'll still enjoy this, I think. But the one story that grabbed me was called Stone Woman. The story is about a clan who lived near Prince William Sound, located in south central Alaska. The people were said to be giants, and they decided they wanted to go inland. There was a great mountain range. It was so high the snow never melted in the summertime, and Raven decided to help them. But he told them that once they made it over the great mountains, that they must not look back to see where they had come from. If they did, Raven told them something terrible would happen. They marched and marched for many days and finally crossed the range into their new homeland. They paused and remembered what Raven said, and no one turned to look back, except one woman with her baby on her back. She turned to look back and was turned into stone. And the tale ends. Today, you can still see her standing in the valley with her baby on her back. Now, like many of you, you have more than likely read or heard about the woman who was turned to a pillar of salt for the same reason. As a child, I never understood the story and thought it was very strange. Why would you change a person to a pillar of salt just because they looked back? I put it out of my mind until I read Smelser's book. Suddenly, the deeper meaning of not looking back when you have set your mind to a new vision became clear. When we are told to create goals or describe a vision for ourselves, social scientists tell us that the words we use actually set our minds in particular directions. Described well, The words pull us toward the achievement of the vision. Looking back dilutes the power of those stories. It dilutes the power of the words of those stories. And when we are hit with a sudden change, we can use those words to reinforce the resilient leader within us. Just think of what David said about those women who didn't want to tell their old stories. Looking back may turn the forward power into stone that holds us in place instead of drawing us on. I'm always surprised when I read tales from other cultures. I'm even more surprised when the lessons are the same ones. The Raven and the Totem by John Smelser. I want to thank you for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation and learned something new. And if you're struggling to find the right words for your vision and would like to turbocharge the resilient leader in you, go to my website, MadelineBlair.com, and schedule a conversation. If you're on YouTube, click that like button. And by all means, subscribe. You know, it helps others find what they are looking for better when people like you express your appreciation. I'm Madeline Blair. And I'm wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock the resilient leader in you.